Hello, welcome to the video. This time we're going to be covering the Vermech faction once again, and we're going to be doing the Rip-Runner from start to finish. So going into this, I wanted something that was lightweight and fast. So it has to visually convey this. So a lightweight frame, less armor, and the shape of the vehicle itself kind of needs to lend itself to a fast, more aerodynamic shape. So going into this as well, I also had in mind the design philosophy that I had established in the repair station. So semicircles, rounded edges, while still remaining kind of scrappy and semi like industrial. So as you can see, I'm just doing the thumbnailing now. The the current one I'm working on is the reverse trike, which ends up being kind of the established shape going forward. But I thought I didn't want to leave it at that, so I decided to explore a little bit more and see what else I could find. So I ended up just trying various like sized engines. So I thought that maybe the engine itself being huge could sell the fact that this thing is powerful and fast, rather than just it being an aerodynamic shape. Another design element and a gameplay mechanical element is going to be the ability to do melee damage. So all the vehicles can ram into each other and do damage, but we want this one to have that as one of its major ways of doing damage. So it has to be better than the other vehicles. So we're thinking like some form of wheel scythe or blade. We go later and add some more cooler things, but I won't spoil it. But for now, we have to sell how it can do damage. So the other way would be dropping items such as mines or caltrops. So the most important aspect of this vehicle is its speed. So we need to convey that through the engine and through the shape of the vehicle. I think something important for the characterization of the vehicle as well is the fact that the driver will be relatively exposed. So this kind of sells the idea that this is a high risk, high reward character or gameplay style, whatever you want to call it. On that note, the driver will probably end up being some kind of predatory creature, like a ferret or maybe even a shrew, something with a really high metabolism that needs to constantly eat to keep itself alive. I think a shrew might be one of the better options. I'm just trying to think of a cool character silhouette sat on this vehicle. Whatever character it ends up being, they have to look ridiculous holding a large revolver, which I've got planned for this vehicle. So that's probably the only form of range damage they can do. So we're not sure quite yet how to incorporate these things, but at the moment they're all still quite concepty. Okay, as you can see, I'm now moving into a thumbnail refinement stage, just so I can add elements together. So we unanimously decided that number 5 was the coolest and had the most unique silhouette. But I really like the armor from number 6. So what I'm doing is combining the two. And considering this vehicle has drop weapons, it needs to be able to get ahead of the other racers without taking too much damage. So it makes sense for the armor to be at the back instead of the front. So yeah, I've taken that element and switched it around. The back wheel ends up getting a little bit bigger along with the engine. I just really want to get across that the fact that this vehicle is kind of overpowered and overclocked and a bit ridiculous. So at the moment, it wasn't quite hitting the level of over the top, but later on we get there. Yeah, something else I'd like to touch on is the fact that I don't normally sketch in this way, this two-tone high contrast sketching. And I feel like it's a really good way of getting across design elements quickly and silhouettes. I think silhouettes are going to be quite important in this game, as they are in most games, obviously, but I feel like with this game it's going to be quite important, as all the different vehicles are going to be widely different shapes and sizes. So you have to sell what this vehicle can do at a distance and know from experience, if you've played the game before, what to do when you encounter that. So this vehicle needs to maintain a kind of a lower silhouette than the rest of the vehicles. At least maybe all the speedsters do. Uh, but I think with this, it has to have that big engine that sticks out along with the oversized back wheel. An element that gave me a little bit of trouble was the front section where the light is and the handlebars. I think I end up resolving this uh, indirectly by adding a section to the front later on. This kind of makes up for the lack of visual interest in that area. But now we're going on to the refined sketch. So at this stage, I'm just taking some of that implied detail from the thumbnail and getting it more concrete. We've got a couple of sections which are a little more complex, such as the engine block. It'll take a little bit longer. Some of that is still implied through large value blocks to block in some shadows. We do end up getting to that later when we do the callouts. But for the moment, I'm just trying to get a really concrete, basic shape of all the different pieces. Yeah, looking back at this, I think I might increase the size of some of these screws and some of these bolts just to try and sell the fact that they're being driven by like rodent-sized creatures. I think uh, I've tried to assimilate some things, like the nail or the screw in the wheel scythe would actually be just a screw, which is a cool feature, as opposed to like something manufactured, or maybe even just a drill bit. Yeah, I think the wheels were eluding me for quite a while, trying to get the right like oval shapes for these. But I think I got somewhere around the level of what I want for this stage. So before I start doing more detail, I decided to do the callouts. Uh, I usually do this once everything's concrete in, but I feel like with this, considering there's multiple angles to be looking at, kind of makes sense to do it before I refine any further. So I'm doing uh, a a side view, a back view. I'm breaking down the engine block and the wheel. Yeah, I do like the way the wheel came out, but I do feel like maybe the drill bit in the center could be bigger, which I might explore once I get into 3D software. It'd be much easier to iterate that way. Along with the actual silhouette, it'd be easier to check over while I'm creating it. But the general vibe of the thing will stay the same. Now, the engine block was a bit of a tricky one. I changed it a few times, go over a few different versions, completely different versions. One with a bit of a belt going on here, and then I try kind of a symmetrical one for a second, but I end up deciding that what I've got is probably the better option in the end. So I just decided to make it bigger, and I think that makes up for any kind of things I weren't liking about it. For references for this, I looked at lawnmower engines and chainsaws and things like that, and that gave me an idea going forward for the type of melee weapon we discussed earlier. It could be a chainsaw, but I wasn't quite sure how to implement it yet. So at this stage, I decided to add a rear view because that's the thing the player is going to see the most. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that it actually does look pretty cool without any real change to the overall silhouette I had to make. So I was quite happy with that. Also, you're going to have the drop weapon, which is just behind the big wheel underneath the armor. You got the engine poking up over the big wheel too. One of the other devs pointed out that the front of the vehicle looked a bit weak, considering the AI will use that to ram into your vehicle. So this is when I decided to add the chainsaw. Okay, this is the longest phase of any of the processes, the line art phase. I'm just going over all the details and making it make sense. I lost a bit of the recording prior to this, which is the chainsaw at the front. I don't know if you can see that right now on the screen. Uh, but basically, I added a triangle chainsaw. There was a few of them which I was deciding from, but that was probably unanimously the best one. I also got some feedback from the one of the devs, and he thought that it'd be cool to have the chainsaw across itself, so like a T shape, like an upside down T shape. And I think that really worked to sell how aggressive this vehicle is. I also thought it'd be cool to add because it's very reminiscent of like Robot Wars, which is a show I used to love when I was a kid. Clarifying some of these engine block details is quite important as well because it's going to make it a little easier when I get to 3D. I feel like it will be quite a challenge to make everything fit. I think it's important to get across the fact that this driver is very reckless, so I think a lot of damage to the vehicle's sides and front is quite important to show how reckless they are and how much dangerous situations they throw themselves in. And also it leads into the style of gameplay which we alluded to earlier and the type of gameplay the player is going to have to do. So this is the part where I add the chainsaw at the front. I think it's the only bit of the chainsaw that I got recorded because I've just looked and I think we also missed the chainsaw callout, which is really annoying because it's one of my favorite pieces on this in this callout sheet. But oh well. As you can see, I've just added the chainsaw there with the chainsaw tooth just to get an idea of how it's going to look because I will have to model that in 3D as well. And before we get to the point where we can start coloring everything, I'm going to do a block in underneath the line art so I can do a clipping mask. I'm just making sure the perspective is correct on some of these bits. So when doing this bit, I always make sure that my brush is a full opacity, so I'm not leaving any room for the background to creep through when I start coloring and when I start to flatten the image later on during the presentation phase. But I wanted it to be clear, now that it's actually being blocked in, that you can see light or you can see the ground through the framework underneath the seat. I think that sells also the fact that this is really light. So with this section, I didn't really want to go much further from what we've already established for the faction. So oranges and metals and different colors for the metal. I didn't really want to go stray too far away from that. We could add skins later down the line maybe, but I don't really think it's necessary to go too far away from that. We want to establish this faction color as like orange and rust. I think the chainsaw teeth being a little bit different to the color of the actual frame for the chainsaw is important as well to distinguish the different pieces. Obviously, they're going to be moving as well, so I add a little bit of variety in that, and it won't all blend together. So I thought it'd be good to establish lights first because it's quite a complex vehicle in terms of what overlaps what. So I thought doing shadows first would be quite key, and then I went on to do highlights. So then later on, when I get to the painting stage, it'll be a little easier. Okay, so this is the point where I start adding in paint and detail. So it seems like a good time to talk about the style for the game. So I've touched on it in a couple of other videos, but basically, especially with things that move, I'm going to use painted normals for the vehicles. So that means it's more of a dynamic, painterly effect. instead of painting in highlights and shadows on the model itself. There will be some ambient occlusion and stuff within the model just from baking, but other than that, it will be mainly me trying to get the model to look like a painted texture no matter what angle you look at it from and no matter what light hits it. For example, if a painted stroke catches a light and it's a metallic texture, it will reflect the light better than, say, a rough textured area. But I aim to have every stroke to be a slightly different tone of color, so it aims to keep that painterly style no matter how the light hits it. So on top of the painted textures in the game, we're going to have a outline over every single item in the game. Every single racer, every car is going to have a solid black outline. And this is going to help support the painted texture by allowing each plane to read individually. I'm not sure if the painted normals is necessary for items that are stationary, but it still might help in terms of the particle effects and how lighting will affect them, such as explosions. So the first vehicle I've already completed, I did painted normals with the outline, and you can see it on the screen here. I think I might have shown it in another video already. I'll maybe put a few different angles of the vehicle on, or maybe a short little clip, just so you can see it properly, to get a feel for the idea of how it's going to look like in-game. I'd also like the arenas to be relatively less attention grabbing. They'll have key items and key positions on the map which will be clear, indicated with different colours, and maybe they're the ones that need painted normals. At the moment I was thinking of keeping this channel 2D, but eventually I could bring some 3D workflows and 3D processes into the channel so you can see that as well. If you guys are interested, just let me know and I can do that. But for the moment, I'll stick with the 2D concept art stuff. But while it's just the rendering going on in the background, I might as well discuss the character again. So the brief for the character in my head is something like a wiry, twitchy racer that on the surface you can tell that they love putting themselves in harm's way and are not afraid to get dirty. So you've got burn marks, chars, like frizzy fur where they've been burned, maybe some scars. Obviously they're going to be cybernetic because that's the whole faction's identity. So I just need to figure out what part of the creature will be cybernetic, because that also plays into the character. Maybe they're very heavily cybernetic because they've been damaged so many times. Maybe they have a weapon for a hand, as they're so, into the idea of violence. Maybe even the revolver I talked about earlier is actually like wrist mounted. Yeah, we could go in many different ways with it. Could even have a melee weapon, but I'm thinking maybe that could be another faction's identity. I've already got some ideas for that. That's going to be exciting to talk about the other factions once we get to that. But we're going to have one more racer in this faction before, one more racer and car before we are ready for the demo. I say that, but we're quite a ways off the demo. We don't want to rush into it. We want to make sure it's nice and polished before we get anything out. But yeah, so I think the aim is to get 3 vehicles completed. So we're going to have the kind of a generic all-rounder, which is the first vehicle I did. And then we've got this one, which is we could say like speedster for now. And then we're going to have one tank type vehicle, which I have a few ideas for this faction, because every faction's classes are going to be slightly different. Eventually, once we've done that, we can come back around and make second vehicles in each class. But that's not a priority right now. It's just a priority to get the faction identity down and yeah, get the races done and a map. So that's in the future soon. We're going to be having an arena map, which is going to be kind of like a junkyard. The first idea for a big level, big arena. But thanks for getting this far into the video, guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully next time we can explore the driver of this vehicle. But for now, I'll see you later.